Welcome back to the 258th episode of the Daily Flip Podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through one story, not multiple stories, just one. It was going to be a little bit more lighthearted. We were going to do dip, dive, dodge, just one little segment this time, make it a little bit more fun. But no, with some of this news coming out, it's one story, well, a whole bunch of stories actually revolving around one thing, which is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Bill. And when I first saw all the language about this, I was like, okay, no, people are being hyperbolic. And to some degree, they were. But then I heard multiple opinions from people from across the aisle, and I thought to myself, okay, wow, there is something else going on here that it does need to be a serious concern on people's minds. So, with our daily debate, if you know what this bill is all about, do you have any opinions? Do you agree, disagree? Love to hear everybody's opinion. Throw it down in the comment section. But with all that said, like I said, this is going to be one story, so it's going to be a little bit shorter today, but let's hop right into it. So, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Bill. What's going on here? What's the big contention? And it's actually an expansion of Title VI, which underneath the Civil Rights Act, which prevents discrimination and harassment under the basis of race, sex, basically immutable characteristics. And in theory, that could already apply to also national origin. So that could theoretically apply to people from Israel. It could apply to Jews because of their, ethnicity. And I guess technically they're trying to expand it a little bit to like religious orientation so that it can actually formally, even though it's kind of already acknowledged that it could cover that, make it formal. And I want to read the language of the bill first, because this one, honestly, I'm going to have a link to it in the description along with the articles from today. And also one of the main things that this bill highlights, that one of the definitions that it's relying on, I'm going to have all of those links there in the description so you can go read this for yourself and you don't have to just take me for it. This bill is very, very short. So there's all this thing about the short title, the sense of Congress, so basically outlining where they are now, and they're saying that anti-Semitism doesn't necessarily have a really rigid definition right now. So then there's findings. Okay, hey, anti-Semitism is going up in the United States, and it's interesting when they say we don't have a hard definition for anti-Semitism yet, but anti-Semitism is going up, so maybe they're using the new definition, maybe not. Now, here is the part that I find, I don't want to say interesting, but crucial to what's going on here. Quote, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, referred to in this act as IHRA, so remember that whenever you hear it in the future. Working definition of anti-Semitism is a vital tool which helps individuals understand and identify the various manifestations of anti-Semitism. And also it talks about an executive order that was passed in December 2019, that also talks about how the IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism, should be enforced underneath Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So it's going on and explaining, hey, we've kind of already have precedent. We're already doing this sort of thing. We're already using this definition. So it's not necessarily something new or novel, but now we're just writing it into the law. That's basically the argument they're making. So then the question becomes, what is the definition that the IHRA provides? And here's the definitions that they have in the bill. And I want to specifically point this out because it's vague. They're not actually listing what the definition is. They're saying, hey, this is what we're using as our definition, but they're not putting it directly in the bill. And they make you kind of go and research on your own, which could be an intentional tactic. Maybe they're saying, hey, we don't actually want everybody to go through and read this as easily. We want them to do a little bit more work if they're interested. Or maybe it's a genuine thing where, hey, it's already documented somewhere. We don't need to list it here. We're just putting it in here as the reference point, and then you can go do your own research. Good-hearted or cynical, depending on which way I'm feeling. But I'm a little bit more cynical on this one, mainly because of some of the definitions that come out of this and the fact that it has a very certain type of support throughout the Congress that passed it. But that's besides the point. Quote, the definition of anti-Semitism adopted on May 26, 2016 by the IHRA, of which the United States is a member, which the definition has been adopted by the Department of State and includes the contemporary examples of anti-Semitism defined identified, in the IHRA definition. So they're basically saying, hey, we're taking on this definition. So, okay, we run through the text of the bill, at least the important things, some of the context. What is the actual language that IHRA is using here? And remember, it is a relatively authoritative source, at least it seems to be. The government's trying to quote out to it. So you would assume, hey, they got a really great definition, and it covers all the different topics. But no, not necessarily. So the definition itself is, quote, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish and non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So it's pretty general. If it's a little bit legalese, but basically it's saying if you're going after Jewish institutions purely for the sake of their cultural heritage, even their religious heritage, then that could be considered anti-Semitic. Or the first line is the certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Once again, a little bit vague, but okay. So it's vague in that it's trying to cover a broad swath, and in that swath, it's pretty straightforward. But any hatred towards Jews basically is what it's defining. That, or the certain perception that allows you to have it, is anti-Semitism. So this is what I found really interesting. With some of the commentary, they directly called out what this could do, or they called out specific examples of what this could end up doing, or they skipped over certain examples. So your more liberal people called out the first example that they provide here, which is it could be quote, manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel, conceiving as Jews as a collective. However, criticism of Israel, similar to the leveling against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. So you see certain people on the left taking that first line and saying, hey, wait, no. Some people really do argue that you can't criticize Israel simply because they are the Jewish state. They represent the Jews around the world, and liberals are really attaching to that line, saying, hey, wait, hold on, you can't criticize the Jewish state. And that with the way they've worded the definition, saying, hey, you can't attack the Jewish state as being a collective of all Jews, but you could still criticize it like any normal state, which is a pretty middle-of-the-road kind of opinion. Because when you hear those arguments, which are really frustrating, which you can't criticize Israel because it's anti-Semitic, and then they expand on it. Well, it's the only Jewish state in the world, and it's a majority Jewish population. If you look it up, it's somewhere around like 79% Jewish, about 19% Muslim, and at 1.9% Christian. I looked it up earlier, so it's somewhere around those numbers. And my question always to that becomes okay, hey, it's a majority Jewish state. So what do we say when we look at India? India is basically 80% Hindu, and if you criticize them, are you criticizing the Hindu religion, the Hindu tradition, the Hindu culture? And obviously, it's a little different, I'm not going to lie, because being a Jew is not just an ethnicity, it's not just a religion, it is multifactorial. But if we are going to say that it is mainly a ethno-state there in the Middle East, and it's comprised of a group of people that it's one solid block, and that criticizing that nation because it is the ethnic state of the Jews, a state determined to be specifically for the Jews, is that the same thing as leveling criticism at another nation that is a majority Hindu? It is obviously not necessarily comparable, and people would argue, oh, well, hold on, what about Nepal? They would say, well, Nepal is also a large Hindu nation, and there's not multiple Israels, there's not multiple majority Jew populations around the world. There is one Jewish state, and that criticism specifically of them is targeted differently than if you were looking at a Hindu majority state, because there are other majority Hindu states. I think that argument is a little bit tedious when it comes down to it, because at the end of the day, you cannot look at the sovereign government of one nation as representing the entire populace of said nation. So if someone levels a accusation, a criticism at the American government, you can probably say, hey, that's against the American government establishment. I think sometimes you would be hard-pressed to genuinely say that is anti-American, because some criticisms about the government and their practices, that those practices may not actually hold up to American values. They may not represent what the actual people of America want. So therefore, it is a completely valid criticism of the U.S. government. And you can say that from the outside. So I think that same sort of standard should apply to the Jewish nation. And that's why when you see people on the left really attaching to that first sentence and kind of leaving out some of the little bit of extra stuff that they put in there, which is, you can't identify the Jewish state as just the collective, a singular collective of Jews and representing all Jews around the world and this kind of conspiracy and cabal behind the scenes. I mean, we've seen this language for years upon years upon years. I mean, even Henry Ford, and this is one example that I always pull out. Henry Ford was a very famous anti-Semite, and he even put money into different efforts within the United States, and even doing a little bit of work over in Europe and trying to expand his production over there. And Hitler even praised him for some of his comments. So, it's not one of those things where, oh yeah, no, this is a new age phenomenon. No, anti-Semitism is set up. There have been bases in the past. And the major criticism of this law is because it is basing its reasoning, there's two major criticisms. One is that it's going to limit people's free speech, their ability to say anything that could be perceived as anti-Semitic, because it's making the definition extremely broad. And that's the more general criticism. And then the more targeted criticism that comes from some people, there's actually two other criticisms, but one on the left is saying, hey, we just don't need to have this sort of system enshrined in law. We already protect the different ethnic groups. We don't have to protect the religious status of Jews and make that something that they can't be discriminated against. That's the more left perspective. I've only heard that from one or two places, so that's not the overarching opinion, but that is something that I've heard, and one that I'm a little hesitant to actually engage with, because it, once again, feels a little bit tedious. They have a point. It is already enshrined in law. But at the same time, that's not the major issues you should be focusing on here. It's not that, this type of protection isn't actually needed. No, you shouldn't look at the protection part of it. You should look at the ability of the U.S. government to infringe upon people's First Amendment rights, and then also pull funding, because that's the whole point of this, is to be able to pull funding, because it's specifically targeted at the education department, to get the money out of these colleges that, hey, may have a counter opinion, may have an opinion that the U.S. government doesn't necessarily like, and they're saying, hey, no, because of this reason, we're going to pull out the money. Many people have said, hey, just pull out the money in general. Maybe you need to make it more private system. Maybe we shouldn't be subsidizing these sort of colleges anyway. That's an argument for another day. And you've heard me on the books from the very beginning saying maybe we should take a lot of the federal money out. I have had that opinion for quite some time. And the reason that this is really frustrating to me is because of the attachment to the Civil Rights Act and Article 6. And it's basically trying to, how should I say it kindly? It is increasing what is basically already a hate speech law, saying that certain criticisms of certain groups should not be allowed. And then by abridging it, kind of updating it, bringing it into the 21st century, it could be a club, a cudgel, for which people are beat over the head for certain types of speech and criticisms about certain people that could be perceived as one way or another. So, and what I mean by that is, even if you don't think what you're saying is anti-Semitic, maybe you are an ignorant person and you don't know what's going on. Maybe you do know what's going on, but you just don't see it as anti-Semitic. Guess what? This could also apply to racist comments, because it's hate speech, things that are hateful towards groups and minorities. And if it applies that somebody else feels a little bit like you're being racist to them, you're making comments that would be considered racist, even if you don't think they are, but the other person takes it that way, you could be the person that is getting sued or taken off some of these college campuses. And imagine so right now this is mainly sticking to college campuses, but imagine if this applies to the rest of society, just like they have in Europe and Germany. They have a hate speech law. I don't know about France. I know about England. The European Union has as a whole, I'm pretty sure, has also adopted hate speech laws, and certain things you're just not allowed to say to people, because if it offends them, if it comes across the wrong way, you can be on the hook. And guess what? I do not want to be at the subjective whims of somebody else. Oh, today I'm in a really crappy mood. You said something that normally I might let go, but today it's actually going to be hate speech. And then I'm at the disposal of somebody else's sensitivities. And I personally don't want to live in that world. I don't think many Americans want to live in that world. That's why we have the First Amendment in the first place, because everybody should be able to voice their opinions no matter how mean, how ugly they are, because at the end of the day, I want to know if you're a terrible person. I want to know. I don't want it to go underground. I don't want you to, go do your little stealth, dark web kind of conversations now. I want you to feel that you're comfortable doing it, because you're not going to be put in jail, and then I cannot associate with you anymore. And that is the entire scheme here. And I have talked about this before. We should be able to say nasty things to anybody based on any characteristic. You should be able to not let people come into your business or give business to certain people if you don't want to based on their characteristics. And guess what? Me and the other 150 million people who are actually active and actually consumers and care about certain values, who are fully aware. There's probably actually more of that, but I'm kind of getting rid of the old and the young. We are just going to say, no, okay, you got a racist company. No, I don't want to go there. You employ certain tactics that are discriminating against women. Hey, I'm not going to tell my daughter to ever work for you. I'm going to tell my family, hey, let's not buy from that company. And we'll let the free market decide. And we actually enforce these sort of moral standards and virtues on a societal level, rather than the government coming in, crushing the dissent with its hand, and telling you how to live your life and telling other people how to live their lives. We need to have a social structure that can handle these sort of things, that discourages the looking at somebody based on their superficial characteristics and declaring a verdict and calling them lesser, or calling them someone that needs to be protected under the sense of law. No, we don't need that. On a social standard, yeah, if there's somebody who's being really hateful, if there's one friend of yours who's just really hateful towards any particular group and you feel uncomfortable about it, guess what? Get out the door. And if you're associating with somebody like that and you don't disavow what they're saying, I don't want to hang out with you. Let's be clear. I can see past certain faults, and maybe you're just casually this, casually that. It doesn't mean we're going to be best friends. We're not going to have conversations about it where I agree. I'm going to yell at you, scream at you, tell you you are absolutely wrong, but you also have the right to believe that, and you have the right to say that. But I'm not inviting you over to certain events. I'm not going to raise you up as a role model for my children, and it needs to be a societal level rather than the government, because when we open up this door, when we say certain types of speech are not okay, when we say that the government can actually, and let's be clear, if the government didn't actually fund these schools, then this specific amendment saying that the education department actually has the ability to pull funding based on these certain things, then it wouldn't be an issue in the first place. But imagine the precedent is set where they say, hey, we're going to pull funding because this is something that is obviously against the rules that we have set in the Civil Rights Act, and now we're actually going to take this further because we don't want businesses to do certain acts. We don't want businesses to be agnostic about this. We actually want them to make statements against anti-Semitism. I know. Slippery slope argument, we may not get there. But it's a real serious question when you start seeing people on the right who have been fighting against this sort of cancel culture, this sort of, oh, we need to protect everybody. Oh, your feelings need to be protected. They've been pushing back against this for years because it's mainly been falling on issues that the left supports. And now that there's an issue that they support, they are actually going forward with more restrictions on people's free speech. And you need to step back and you need to say, were they doing this? Were they trying to make the free speech argument? Were they trying to protect these certain rights, whether you like them or not? Were they trying to protect these certain ideals simply because it was politically advantageous, or because they genuinely believed in the principles that are outlined in our Constitution and the traditions that have been born through our society of free speech? And if it is the former and not the latter, then you need to criticize them. If it's the latter, you genuinely believe it's about free speech, go right ahead. If you're a free speech absolutist, support it. If you totally disagree with me, then you're going to be like, no, Alex, what do you mean? I don't care if it was politically advantageous. We need to get hate speech out of there. then great. I know a lot of people in my generation agree that hate speech should not be something that is allowed on a legal level. We could have those conversations, and guess what? Hey, we're going to let you speak. I don't think anybody should shut you down for that, because that's the beauty of our system. And I hope you would give me and everybody else the chance to do the exact same thing, which is put out something which, if you don't like what I'm saying, you could probably say, oh, well, hold on. Alex, that thing you just said about there should be discrimination allowed in the free market and then let the market decide. What I said was, on a social level, we should totally get rid of all of these terrible things, but having it be mandated by the government is the issue there. Someone could probably misconstrue that and try to call it hate speech and try to shut me down because of it. And if they're doing it because it's politically advantageous, remember when I said, if it's the former, not the latter, that falls into that category. It's politically advantageous. We're going to shut your speech down. Versus a principled stance. I can understand a principled stance. Doesn't mean I agree with you. We can have a conversation about it. But if we're just going with the politically advantageous, you can be politically advantageous about some things. You can kind of be practical. You can try to do behind-the-scenes work. But when it comes to things that are as crucial as the right to speak your mind and put your opinion out there, that is one thing among a few others that I am not going to stand for. I'm not going to dedicate a few different articles. I'm not going to do some other stories. No. We're going to spend, at this point, which is almost the end here, we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about it because that's how important it is. So, thank you for joining me for this episode of the Daily Flip Podcast. I didn't actually get to the other articles. One of them came from CNBC, and the other one came from the New York Times. They kind of just provide a little bit more background, pretty similar perspectives, honestly, but I don't think that they were actually necessary for me to get my point across, but they did provide a little bit of context as I was initially reading into what passed yesterday on May 1st. So I will have all of them linked in the description, along with the link to the bill and to the IHRA website where you can read their definition of anti-Semitism. They do provide lots more examples. I couldn't break down all of them in this time, but they provide lots more examples of when anti-Semitism is actually anti-Semitism in their mind and maybe not. So, again, if you want to check those out, they'll be links in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the link to the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Google Podcast, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.